of reading an extraordinary book. We're reading the autobiography of Mr. Solomon Northup. Maybe you've heard of the movie that was made after his experience, 12 Years a Slave. Let's light our candles, put a little light on the subject matter, and let's try to do this all in one candle. Last night we had a little boo-boo. Come on, baby. There we go. And I think I have too much of light with all three of these, so we'll just try this out. Okay, that went without incident. Perfect. So I think I had too much of light last night. But I want to welcome you guys for joining. Thank you so much. Let's talk a little bit about the book. You know what? I'm going to just light that other one too. All right, so why did I do that? I should have. Also, I need to figure out the light time that a candle is able to safely produce. So I'll know just how much my bill is going to be for all of these candles on a consistent basis. All right, so thanks for joining. I'm trying to get this frame right. And what we'll do is we'll talk about, move Rocky out the way, move our bookmark, and try to keep that from engulfing. And we'll talk a little bit about the book. Thank you for joining. I'm Paul. I'm a third of Pause and Play NOLA. And ever since I started this YouTube channel with my family, I wanted to do some reading on it. Reading is so important. And I think with reading, most of us don't read enough books. But this book is a great book. And the experience that the author of this book went through was totally terrifying, but true. So it's a good publication because it talks about his life, his experience, and we could get to know him through that. But also it talks about something that has affected millions of people earthwide, maybe even, I would say, billions of people earthwide, that of being enslaved. And so this book is a wonderful testament to the power of resilience and not giving up, the power of hope and endurance and other qualities that can help anyone to overcome a bad situation. So thank you for joining. We're going to read this book. We're doing great. We're on chapter 11. And I'll just do a little recap of what we've read so far. In chapter 1, we learned of Mr. Northup, his parents, his marriage. We've learned of his where he lived. We learned of his work, all in chapter 1. We also have learned in chapter 2 how he ended up taking this job where he actually was bamboozled and hoodwinked and sold into slavery, kidnapped. And so in chapter 3, we learned of him being at the Williams slave pen in Washington, D.C., and some of the people that he met, like Randall, Ray Williams, Emily, Eliza, and Robert. We also learned in chapter 4 how the family was split up. Eliza lost her children, Randall and Emily, and she was sent to a plantation that William Ford owned. And we also learned about William Ford that Mr. Northup said that if he could have his personal family and could have been a slave or enslaved for William Ford, he would have did it without a problem because Mr. Ford was such a noble man, even though he was a slave owner. But he was a nice religious man, nobody like him. We also learned in chapter 5 about Robert's death of smallpox, and we also learned about Mr. Northup coming to New Orleans, then being sold to Mr. Ford. In chapter 6, we learned of some of the things that they had to endure before they were sold, and also the mental battle that was there with hoping you got a good slave master, a good master. And so, chapter 7, Solomon arrives with Eliza to a plantation in right outside of New Orleans in the Alexandria area. And he also talks about the name of the forest, the Great Pine Woods. He also he also observed Native Americans, and he actually was at one of their celebrations as well. So in chapter 8, he gets sold to a different person named Tibbets, and him and Tibbets had a tumultuous working relationship, and he actually defended himself against Tibbets and beat Tibbets pretty bad. After which Tibbets sought vengeance and was going to hang Mr. Northup, Tibbets and two other men. But another man that was on the property, Mr. Chapton, he got in the way. He stopped the hanging of Mr. Northup. Tibbets was not happy. Tibbets came back. Mr. Chapton told Mr. Northup that he had always better keep his eye on Tibbets because Tibbets was going to get him. So next thing you know, Tibbets returns and him and Solomon went back to work. And then Tibbets attacked Solomon with a hatchet. And when Solomon grabbed him and threw the hatchet, Tibbets came back with a stick. When Solomon caught the stick and threw Tibbets to the earth, Tibbets tried to get an axe, a felon axe. And Solomon ran and collided with him, overpowered him, and that's when he knew he had to run for his life. So he spent over 24 hours in the swamp, and he ran for his life. He saw alligators, he saw bear, he saw moccasins at every step, and it was a very harrowing ordeal. But he survived and was not hung in the swamp by the people that were after him. He outran the hounds. He swam through this deep lake out there in the swamp, in the Packagee swamp, and he survived with no food and no water. So, thank you, Boo. So he survived all of these encounters in the swamp, and he returned to the plantation of Mr. Ford. Now, once he arrived at the plantation of Mr. Ford, Ford comforts him, he feeds him, he tells him to rest, and now we arrive to chapter 11. And so we're going to read more about chapter 11 in this wonderful publication. But as always, what I like to do before we start a chapter, I'm going to read a section of the publication just to give you an idea of some of the thoughts that are therein. Okay, so this publication right here, I received this publication from a good friend of mine who is currently deceased. And so she wanted me to read this book. I read the book. I fell in love with Solomon Northup. I fell in love with his mentality and the idea that he was able to endure something so many didn't. He was able to survive this horrible institution of enslavement, and it never made him bitter. It never broke him as a human. And being that he experienced freedom his whole life, he experienced free air, he experienced not having to run for his life from no man, and now to be on a plantation and to experience hatred, to experience the brutality and the cruelty of a whip against his back, and to experience treatment that he knew was not right. He was not born a slave. He understood how the world worked, how society worked, and he recognized that this horrible calamity befell him, so much so that in his earlier bit of enslavement, death would have been a liberation from it. But now that he's in it, it's just an amazing, amazing man. So if I may, I'll read the inside cover. There it says, 12 years a slave, in a stunning reversal of stereotype, he is often a man among beasts. That is Eric Ashley Hairston from the introduction. One of the most compelling and detailed slave narratives in existence, 12 Years a Slave, is the chronicle of the amazing ordeal of Solomon Northup, a free African-American kidnapped in the North and impressed into slavery in Louisiana. There must have been some misapprehension, some unfortunate mistake, writes Northup. It could not be that a free citizen of New York who had wronged no man nor violated any law should be dealt with thus inhumanely. As an educated man, torn from freedom and plunged into slavery, he brings into exact clarity the life and labor of slaves in the antebellum American South, the complex economic choices and ironic moral concessions of slaveholding, and the calamitous effect of slavery on the foundations of civilization. Throughout his horrific imprisonment, Solomon Northup resists the urge to laud himself as an exemplary character. The back of the book, this is no fiction, no exaggeration. If I have failed in anything, it has been in presenting to the reader too prominently the bright side of the picture. Now I want to make a confession. Yesterday, I finally understood, after reading this book 2 times, I read this book completely once, and when I got to chapter 10, I finally understood what this means. In a stunning reversal of stereotype, he is often a man among beasts. He was enslaved, but not one time did he do anything wrong. Not one time did he not accept his situation and be a good worker to a man that did not deserve or have the right to own him. But because of the situation, he accepted that and he worked diligently at all costs. When he got into the fight and he defended his life against Mr. Tidbits, he never responded harshly, even in defending his life. But now he had to run as a fugitive, and he survived the perils of the swamp. And so now we'll begin reading chapter 11. But before I start, let me get a little sip of some hot water. So parched. Okay, here we go. And I want to say thank y'all for joining, and thank y'all for supporting this live stream. Let me try to get this lighting a little bit better. It is super dangerous reading by candlelight. I must warn you. One wrong move. Okay. After a long sleep, sometime in the afternoon, I awoke refreshed but very sore and stiff. Sally came in and talked with me while John cooked me some dinner. Sally was in great trouble, as well as myself, one of her children being ill, and she feared it could not survive. Dinner over, after walking about the quarters for a while, visiting Sally's cabin, And looking at the sick child, I strolled into Madam's garden. Though it was the season of the year when the voices of the birds are silent and the trees are stripped of their summer glories in more frigid climes, yet the whole variety of roses were there in bloom, and the long, luxuriant vines creeping over the frames. The crimson and golden fruit hung half hidden amongst the younger and older blossoms of the peach, the orange, the plum, and the pomegranate. For in the region of almost perpetual warmth, the leaves are fallen, and the buds bursting into bloom the whole year long. I indulged the most grateful feelings towards Master and Mistress Ford, and wishing in some manner to repay their kindness, commenced trimming the vines, and afterwards weeding out the grass from among the orange and pomegranate trees. The latter grows 8 or 10 feet high, and its fruit, though larger, is similar in appearance to the jelly flower. It has the luscious flavor of the strawberry. Oranges, peaches, plums, and the most other fruits are indigenous to the rich, warm soils of Avoyes, but the apple, the most common of them all in colder latitudes, is rarely to be seen here. Mistress Ford came out presently, saying it was praiseworthy in me, but I was not in the condition to labor, and might rest myself at the quarters until master should go down to Bayou Buff, which would not be that day, and it might not be the next. I said to her, to be sure I felt bad and was stiff, and that my foot pained me. The stubs and thorns have so torn it, but thought such exercise would not hurt me, and that it was a great pleasure to work for so good a mistress. Thereupon she returned to the great house, and for 3 days I was diligent in the garden, cleaning the walks, weeding the flower buds, and pulling up the rank grass beneath the jasmine vines, which the gentle and generous hand of my protectress had taught to clamber along the walls. The fourth morning, having become recruited and refreshed, Master Ford ordered me to make ready to accompany him to the bayou. There was but one saddle horse at the opening, and all the others with the mules having been sent down to the plantation. I said I could walk, and bidding Sally and John goodbye, left the opening, trotting along by the horse's side. That little paradise in the great pine woods was the oasis in the desert, towards which my heart turned lovingly during my years of bondage. I went forth from it now with regret and sorrow, not so overwhelmingly, however, as if it had been then given me to know that I should never return to it again. Master Ford urged me to take his place occasionally on a horse to rest me, but I said no. I was not tired, and it was better for me to walk than him. He said many kind and cheering things to me on the way, riding slowly in order that I might keep pace with him. The goodness of God was manifest. He declared in my miraculous escape from the swamp, as Daniel came forth unharmed from the den of lions. And as Jonah had been preserved in the whale's belly, even so I had been delivered from evil by the Almighty. He interrogated me in regard to the various fears and emotions I had experienced during the day and night, and if I had felt at any time a desire to pray. I felt forsaken of the whole world. I answered him and was praying mentally all the while. At such times, said he, the heart of a man turns instinctively towards his Maker. In prosperity, and when there is nothing to injure or make him afraid, he remembers him not and is ready to defy him. But place him in the midst of dangers, cut him off from human aid, let the grave open before him, then it is in time of his tribulation that the scoffer and unbelieving man turns to God for help, feeling there is neither hope or refuge or safety, saving his protecting arm. So did the benignant man speak to me of this life, of the life of hereafter, of the goodness and power of God, and of vanity of earthly things, as we journeyed along the solitary road towards Bayou Buff. When within some 5 miles of the plantation, we discovered a horseman at a distance, galloping towards us. As he came near, I saw that it was Tidbits. He looked at me a moment, but did not address me, and turning about, rode along side by side with Ford. I trotted silently at their horses' heels, listening to their conversation. Ford informed him of my arrival in the Pine Woods 3 days before, of the sad plight I was in, and of the difficulties and dangers I had encountered. Well, exclaimed Tibbets, omitting his usual oaths in the presence of Ford, I never saw such a running before. I'll bet him against $100 he'll beat any nigger in Louisiana. I offered John David Cheney $25 to catch him, dead or alive, but he outran his dogs in a fair race. Them Cheney dogs ain't much after all. Dunwoodie's hounds would have had him down before he touched the palmettos. Somehow the dogs got off the track, and we had to give up the hunt. We rode the horses as far as we could, and then kept on foot till the water was 3 feet deep. The boys said he was drowned, sure. I allowed I wanted shot at him mightily, ever since I had been riding up and down the bayou, but hadn't much hope of catching him. Thought he was dead. Oh, he's a cuss to run, that nigger is. In this way Tibbets ran on, describing his search in the swamp, the wonderful speed with which I had fled before the hounds. And when he finished, Master Ford responded by saying, I had always been a willing and faithful boy with him, that he was sorry we had such a trouble, that according to Platt's story, he had been inhumanely treated, and that he, Tibbets, was himself at fault. Using hatchets and broadaxes upon slaves was shameful, and should not be allowed, he remarked. This is no way of dealing with them. When first brought into the country, it will have a pernicious influence and set them all running away. The swamps will be full of them. A little kindness would be far more effectual in restraining them and rendering them obedient than the use of such deadly weapons. Every plant on the bayou should frown upon such inhumanity. It is for the interest of all to do so. It is evident enough, Mr. Tibbets, that you and Platt cannot live together. You dislike him and would not hesitate to kill him, and knowing it, he will run from you again, through fear of his life. Now, Tibbets, you must sell him or hire him out at least. Unless you do so, I shall take measures to get him out of your possession. In this spirit, Ford addressed him the remainder of the distance. I opened not my mouth. On reaching the plantation, they entered the great house. While I repaired to Eliza's cabin, the slaves were astonished to find me there. On returning from the field, supposing I was drowned the night again, they gathered about the cabin to listen to the story of my adventure. They took it for granted I would be whipped, and that it would be severe, the well-known penalty of running away being 500 lashes. Poor fellow, said Eliza, taking me by the hand. It would have been better for you if you had drowned. You have a cruel master, and he will kill you yet. I am afraid, Lawson suggested, that it might be. Overseer Chapman would be appointed to inflict the punishment, in which case it would not be severe, whereupon Mary, Rachel, Bristol, and others hoped it would be Master Ford, and then it would be no whipping at all. They all pitied me and tried to console me, and were sad in view of the castigation that awaited me, except Kentucky John. There were no bounds to his laughter. He filled the cabin with cachinnations, holding his sides to prevent an explosion. And the cause of his noisy mirth was the idea of my outstripping the hounds. Somehow, he looked at the subject in a comical light. I know they wouldn't catch him when he run across the plantation. Oh, the Lord, didn't Platt pick his feet right up, though? Hey, when them dogs got what he wasn't dog. Ha, ha, ha. Oh, the Lord, admitty. And then Kentucky John relapsed into another of his boisterous fits. Early in the morning, Tibbets left the plantation in the course of the forenoon. While soldering about the gin house, a tall, good-looking man came to me and inquired if I was Tibbets' boy, that youthful appellation being applied indiscriminately to slaves, even though they may have passed the number of 80 years and 10. I took off my hat and answered that I was. How would you like to work for me, he inquired. Oh, I would like that very much, I said. inspired with a sudden hope of getting away from Tibbetts. You work under Myers at Peter Tanner's, didn't you? I replied I had, adding some complimentary remarks that Myers had made concerning me. Well, boy, said he, I have hired you of your master to work for me in the Big Cane Break, 38 miles from here, down on Red River. This man, Mr. Eldred, who lived below Floyd's on the same side of the bayou, I accompanied him to his plantation and in the morning started with his slave Sam and a wagon load of provisions drawn by 4 mules for the Big Cane. Eldred and Myers having preceded us on horseback, this Sam was a native of Charleston, where he had a mother and a brother and sisters. He allowed a common word among both black and white, that Tibbetts was a mean man, and hoped, as I most earnestly did also, that his master would buy me. We proceeded down the south shore of the bayou, crossing it at Carey's plantation. From thence to Huff Power, passing which we came upon the Bayou Rouge Road, which runs toward Red River. After passing through Bayou Rouge Swamp, and just at sunset turning from the highway, we struck off into the Big Cane Break. We followed an unbeaten track, scarcely wide enough to admit the wagon. The cane was such as are used for fishing rods, were as thick as they could stand. A person could not be seen through them the distance of a rod. The paths of wild beasts run through them in various directions. The bear and the American tiger abounded in these breaks, and wherever there is a basin of stagnant water, it is full of alligators. We kept on our lonely course through the Big Cane, several miles when we entered a clearing known as Sutton's Field. Many years before, a man by the name of Sutton had penetrated the wilderness of Cane to this solitary place. Tradition has it that he fled thither a fugitive, not from service, but from justice. He had lived alone, recluse and hermit of the swamp, with his own hands planting the seed and gathering in the harvest. One day a band of Indians stole upon his solitude, and after a bloody battle overpowered and massacred him. 4 miles the country round, in the slaves' quarters and on the piazzas of great houses, where white children listened to superstitious tales, the story goes that that spot in the heart of the Big Cane is a haunted place. For more than a quarter of a century, human voices had rarely, if ever, disturbed the silence of the clearing. Rank and noxious weeds have overspread the once cultivated field. Serpents stunned themselves on the doorway of the crumbling cabin. It was indeed a dreary picture of desolation. Passing Sutton's Field, we followed a new road 2 miles farther, which brought us to its termination. We had now reached the wildlands of Mr. Eldred, where he contemplated clearing up an extensive plantation. We went to work next morning with our cane knives and cleared a sufficient space to allow the erection of 2 cabins, one for Myers and Eldred, the other for Sam, myself, and the slaves that were to join us. We were now in the midst of trees of enormous growth, whose widespread branches almost shut out the light of the sun, while the space between the trunks was an impervious mass of cane, with here and there an occasional palmetto. The bay and the sycamore, the oak and the cypress reach a growth unparalleled in those fertile lowlands bordering the Red River. From every tree, moreover, hang long, large masses of moss, presenting to the eye unaccustomed to them a striking and singular appearance. This moss in large quantities is sent north, and there used for manufacturing purposes. We cut down oaks, split them into rails, and with these erected temporary cabins. We covered the roofs with broad palmetto leaf, an excellent substitute for shingles, as long as they last. The greatest annoyance I met with here were small flies, gnats, and mosquitoes. They swarmed the air. They penetrated the porches of the ear and the nose, the eyes, the mouth. They sucked themselves beneath the skin. It was impossible to brush or beat them off. It seemed indeed as if they would devour us, carry us away piecemeal in their small, tormenting mouths. A lonelier spot, or one more disagreeable than the center of the Big Cane Break, it would be difficult to conceive, yet to me It was a paradise in comparison with any other place in the company of Master Tibbets. I labored hard oft times, was weary and fatigued, yet I could lie down at night in peace, and arise in the morning without fear. In the course of a fortnight, 4 black girls came down from Eldridge Plantation: Charlotte, Fanny, Cressia, and Nellie. They were all large and stout. Axes were put in their hands, and they were sent out with Sam and myself to cut trees. They were excellent choppers, the largest oak or sycamore standing but a brief season before their heavy and well-directed blows. At piling logs, they were equal to any man. There are lumberwomen as well as lumbermen in the forests of the South. In fact, the region of the Bayou Buff, they perform their share of all their labor required on the plantation. They plow, drag, drive, team, clear wildlands, work on the highway, and so forth. Some planters owning large cotton and sugar plantations have none other than the labor of slave women. Such a one is Jim Burns, who lives on the north shore of the bayou, opposite the plantation of John Fogelman. On arrival in the break, Eldred promised me, if I worked well, I might go up to visit my friends at Ford's in 4 weeks. On Saturday night of the 5th week, I reminded him of his promise when he told me I had done so well that I might go. I had set my heart upon it, and Eldred's announcement thrilled me with pleasure. I was to return in time to commence the labors of the day on Tuesday morning. While indulging the pleasant anticipation of so soon meeting my old friends again, suddenly the hateful form of Tibbets appeared among us. He inquired how Myers and Platt got along together, and was told very well, and that Platt was going up to Ford's plantation in the morning on a visit. Puh, puh, sneered Tibbets. It isn't worthwhile. That nigger will get unsteady. He can't go. But Eldred insisted I had finally worked faithfully, that he had given me promise, and that under the circumstances I ought not be disappointed. They then, it being about dark, into one cabin and I the other. I could not give up the idea of going. It was a sore disappointment. Before morning, I resolved, if Eldred made no objection, to leave at all hazards at daylight. I was at his door, with my blanket rolled up in a bundle and hanging a stick over my shoulder, waiting for a pass. Tibbets came out presently in one of his disagreeable moods, washed his face, and going to a stump near by, sat down upon it, apparently busily thinking with himself. After standing there a long time, impelled by a sudden impulse of impatience, I started off. Are you going without a pass? He cried out to me. Yes, master, I thought I would, I answered. How do you think you'll get there? Demanded he. Don't know, was all the reply I had made. You'd be taken and sent to jail, where you ought to be, before you got halfway there. He added, passing into the cabin as if he said. He came out soon with the pass in his hand and called me a nigger that deserved 100 lashes, threw it on the ground. I picked it up and hurried away speedily. A slave caught off his master's plantation without a pass may be seized and whipped by any white man whom meets. The one I now received was dated and read as follows. Platt has permission to go to Ford's plantation on Bayou Buff and return by Tuesday morning. John M. Tibbets. This is the usual form. On the way, a great many demanded it, read it, and passed on. Those having the air and appearance of gentlemen, whose dress indicated the possession of wealth, frequently took no notice of me whatever. But a shabby fellow, an unmistakable loafer, never failed to hail me and to scrutinize and examine me in the most thorough manner. Catching runaways is sometimes a money-making business. If after advertising no owner appears, they may be sold to the highest bidder, and certain fees are allowed, the finder, for his services at all events, if ever reclaimed. A mean white, therefore, a name applied to the species loafer, considers it a godsend to meet an unknown Negro without pass. There are no inns along the highways in that portion of the state where I sojourned. I was wholly destitute of money, neither did I carry any provisions on my journey from the Big Cane to Bayou Buff. Nevertheless, With his pass in hand, a slave need never suffer from hunger or from thirst. It is only necessary to present it to the master or the overseer of a plantation and state his wants, when he will be sent round to the kitchen and provided with food or shelter as the case may require. The traveler stops at any house and calls for a meal with as much freedom as if it was a public tavern. It is the general customary of the country. Whatever their faults may be, it is certain the inhabitants along Red River and around the bayous of the interior of Louisiana are not wanting in hospitality. I arrived at Ford Plantation towards the close of the afternoon, passing the evening in Eliza's cabin with Lawson, Rachel, and others of my acquaintance. When we left Washington, Eliza's form was round and plump. She stood erect, and her silks and jewels presented a picture of graceful strength and elegance. Now she was but a thin shadow of her former self. Her face had become ghastly haggard, and the once straight and active form was bowed down, as if bearing the weight of 100 years. Crouching on her cabin floor, and clad in the coarse garment of a slave, old Elisha Berry would not have recognized the mother of his child. I never saw her afterwards. Having become useless in the cotton field, she was bartered for a trifle to some man residing in the vicinity of Peter Compton's. Grief had gnawed remorselessly at her heart until her strength was gone, and for that her last master, it is said, lashed and abused her most unmercifully. But he could not whip back the departed vigor of her youth, nor straighten up her bended body to its full height, such as it was when her children were around her, and the light of freedom was shining on her path. I learned the particulars relative to her departure from this world from some of Compton's slaves, who had come over the Red River to Bayou to assist young Madame Tanner during the busy season. She became at length, they said, utterly helpless for several weeks, lying on the ground floor in a dilapidated cabin, dependent upon the mercy of her fellow thralls for an occasional drop of water and a morsel of food. Her master did not knock her on the head, as it sometimes done to put a suffering animal out of misery, but left her unprovided for and unprotected to linger through a little pain and wretchedness to its natural close. When the hands returned from the field one night, they found her dead. During the day, the angel of the Lord, who moveth in visibility over all the earth, gathering in harvests of departing souls, had silently entered the cabin of the dying woman and taken her there from thence. She was free at last. Next day, rolling up my blanket, I started on my return to the Big Cane. After traveling 5 miles at a place called Huff Power, the ever-present Tibbets meet me in the road. He inquired why I was going back so soon, and when informed I was anxious to return by the time I was directed, he said I need not go no further than the next plantation, as he had that day sold me to Edwin Epps. We walked down into the yard, where we met the latter gentleman, who examined me and asked me the usual questions. Propounded by purchasers, having been duly delivered, I was ordered to the quarters and at the same time directed to make a hoe and axe handle for myself. I was now no longer the property of Tibbets, his dog, his brute, dreading his wrath and cruelty day and night. And whoever or whatever my new master might prove to be, I could not certainly regret the change. So it was good news when the sale was announced, and with a sigh of relief, I sat down for the first time in my new abode. Tibbet soon after disappeared from the section of the country. Once afterward, and only once, I caught a glimpse of him. It was many miles from Bayou Buff. He was seated in the doorway of a low groggery I was passing in a drove of slaves through St. Mary's Parish. So that was chapter 11, and I thank y'all for tuning in to it, and I'll give a little commentary on it. So, Mr. Northup was sold from Mr. Ford to Mr. Tibbets. And Mr. Tibbets was a very hateful man. And he hated Mr. Northup. And so every chance he could abuse him, he would. But in a turn of events, Mr. Northup stood up for himself. And when he stood up for himself, that made the hatred of Tibbets that much stronger against Northup. So Mr. Northup ran for his life and survived the swamp to get away from being killed by Tibbets. So now in chapter 11, Solomon is back with Mr. Ford, and now he is going to help someone else on a different plantation, and that way he feels safe from Tibbets. But Tibbets is still loitering around, and no doubt his goal is to kill Mr. Northup at all costs. But he gets condemned for his abuse of him, and now Mr. Northup just finds out he gets sold to Edwin Epps. So now we'll pick up in chapter 12. Edwin Epps, of whom much will be said during the remainder of this history, is a large, portly, heavy-bodied man with light hair, high cheekbones, and a Roman nose of extraordinary dimensions. He has blue eyes and a fair complexion, and is, as I should say, full 6 feet high. He has the sharp, inquisitive expression of a jockey. His manners are repulsive and coarse, and his language gives speedy and unequivocal evidence that he has never enjoyed the advantages of an education. He has the faculty of saying most provoking things in that respect, even excelling old Peter Tanner. At the time I came into his possession, Edwin Epps was fond of the bottle, his sprees sometimes extending over the space of 2 whole weeks. Latterly, however, he had reformed his habits, and when I left was as strict a specimen of temperance as could be found on Bayou Buff. When in his cups, Master Epps was a roistering, blustering, noisy fellow whose chief delight was in dancing with his niggers, or lashing them about the yard with his long whip, just for the pleasure of hearing them scream and screech, as the great welts were planted on their backs. When sober, he was silent, reserved, and cunning, not beating us indiscriminately, as in his drunken moments, but sending the end of his rawhide to some tender spot of a lagging slave with a sly dexterity peculiar to himself. He had been a driver and overseer in his younger years, but at this time was in possession of a plantation on Bayou Buff, Huff Power, 2.5 miles from Holmesville, 18 from Marksville, and 12 from Cheneyville. It belonged to Joseph B. Roberts, his wife's uncle, and was leased by Epps. His principal business was raising cotton, and as much as some may read this book who have never seen a cotton field, a description of the manner of its culture may not be out of place. The ground is prepared by throwing up beds or ridges with the plow back furrowing. It is called oxen and mules, the latter almost exclusively, are used in plowing. The women are frequently, as the men perform this labor, feeding, currying, and taking care of their teams, and in all respects doing the field and stable work, precisely as do the plowboys of the North. The beds or ridges are 6 feet wide. This is from water furrow to water furrow. A plow drawn by one mule is then run along the top of the ridge or center of the bed, making the drill into which a girl usually drops the seed, which she carries in a bag hung round her neck. Behind her comes a mule or an harrow covering up the seed, so that 2 mules, 3 slaves, a plow and a harrow are employed in planting a row of cotton. This is done in the months of March and April. Corn is planted in February. When there are no cold rains, the cotton usually makes its appearance in a week. In course of 8 or 10 days afterward, the first hoeing is commenced. This is performed in part also by the aid of the plow and mule. The plow passes as near as possible to the cotton on both sides, throwing the furrow from it. Slaves followed their hoes, cutting up the grass and cotton, leaving hills 2 feet and a half apart. This is called scraping cotton. In 2 weeks more commences the second hoeing. This time the furrow is thrown towards the cotton. Only one stalk, the largest, is now left standing in each hill. In another fortnight it is hoed the third time, throwing the furrow towards the cotton in the same manner as before, and killing all the grass between the rows. About the 1st of July, when it is a foot high or thereabouts, it is hoed the fourth and last time. Now the whole space between the rows are plowed, leaving a deep water furrow in the center. During all these hoeings, the overseer or driver follows the slaves on horseback with a whip, such as has been described. The fastest hoer takes the lead row. He is usually about a rod in advance of his companions. If one of them passes him, he is whipped. If one falls behind or is a moment idle, he is whipped. In fact, the lash is flying from morning until night, the whole day long. The hoeing season thus continues from April until July, a field having no sooner been finished once than it is commenced again. In the latter part of August begins the cotton picking season, and this time each slave is presented with a sack. A strap is fastened to it, which goes over the neck, holding the mouth of the sack breast high, while the bottom reaches nearly the ground. Each one is also presented with a large basket that will hold about 2 barrels. This is to put the cotton in when the sack is filled. The baskets are carried to the field and placed at the beginning of the rows. When a new hand, one unaccustomed to the business, is sent for the first time into the field, he is whipped up smartly and made from that day to pick as fast as he can possibly. At night it is weighed, so that his capability in the cotton picking is known. He must bring in the same weight each night following. If it falls short, it is considered evidence that he has been laggard, and a greater or less number of lashes is the penalty. An ordinary day's work is considered 200 pounds. A slave who is accustomed to picking is punished if he or she brings in less than that. There is a great difference among them as regards this kind of labor. Some of them seem to have a natural knack or quickness which enables them to pick with great clarity and with both hands, while others with whatever practice or industry are utterly unable to come up with the ordinarily standard. Such hands are taken from the cotton field and employed in other businesses. Patsy, of whom I shall have more to say, was known as the most remarkable cotton picker on Bayou Buff. She picked with both hands and with such surprising rapidity that 500 pounds a day was not unusual for her. Each one is tasked, therefore, according to his picking abilities, none, however, to come short of 200 weight. I, being unskilled always in that business, would have unsatisfied my master by bringing in the latter quantity, while on the other hand, Patsy would surely have been beaten if she failed to produce twice as much. The cotton grows from 5 to 7 feet high, each stalk having a great many branches shooting out in all directions and lapping each other about the water furrow. There are few sights more pleasant to the eye than a wide cotton field when it is in bloom. It presents an appearance of purity, like an immaculate expansion of light, new fallen snow. Sometimes a slave picks down one side of a row and back up the other one, but more usually there is one on either side gathering all that has blossomed, leaving the unopened bowls for a succeeding picking. When the sack is filled, it is emptied in a basket and trodden down. It is necessary to be extremely careful the first time going through the field in order not to break the branches off the stalk. The cotton will not bloom upon a broken branch. Epps never failed to inflict the severest chastisement on the unlucky servant who either carelessly or unavoidably was guilty in the least degree in this respect. The hands are required to be in the cotton fields as soon as it is light in the morning, and with the exception of 10 or 15 minutes, which is given them at noon to swallow their allowance of cold bacon, they are not permitted to be moment idle until it is too dark to see. And when the moon is full, they oftentimes labor till the middle of the night. They do not dare stop, even at dinner time, nor return to the quarters, however late it be, until the order is to halt given by the driver. The day's work over in field, the baskets are toted, or in other words, carried to the gin house, where the cotton is weighed. No matter how fatigued and how weary he may be, no matter how much he longs for sleep and rest, a slave never approaches the gin house with his basket of cotton, but with fear. If it falls short in weight, if he has not performed the full task appointed him, he knows that he must suffer. And if he has exceeded it by 10 or 20 pounds, in all probability his master will measure the next day's task accordingly. So whether he has little or too much, his approach to the gin house is always with fear and trembling. Most frequently, they have too little, and therefore it is they are not anxious to leave the field. After weighing follow the whippings, and then the baskets are carried to the cotton house, and their contents are stored away like hay, all hands being sent to the tramp it down. If the cotton is not dry, instead of taking it to the gin house at once, it is laid upon platforms 2 feet high and some 3 times as wide, covered with boards or plank with narrow walks running between them. Pardon me while I take a little drink. What's up, Ferg? How you doing, brother? Thanks for hopping on. This done, the labor of the day is not yet ended by any means. Each one must then attend to his respective chores. One feeds the mules, another the swine, another cuts the wood, and so forth. Besides, the packing is all done by candlelight. Finally, at a late hour, they reach the quarters, sleepy and overcome by the long day's toil. Then a fire must be kindled in the cabin, the corn ground into a small hand mill, and supper and dinner for the next day in the field prepared. All that is allowed them is corn and bacon, which is given out of the corn crib and the smokehouse every Sunday morning. Each one receives as his weekly allowance 3.5 pounds of bacon and enough corn to make a peck of meal. That is all. No tea, coffee, sugar, and with the exception of a very scanty sprinkling now and then, no salt. I can say from 10 years residence with Master Epps that no slave of his is ever likely to suffer from the gout, soup induced by excessively high living. Master Epps' hogs were fed on shelled corn, and it was thrown out to his niggers in the ear. The former, he thought, would fatten faster by shelling and soaking in the water. The latter, perhaps, if treated in the same manner, might grow too fat to labor. Master Epps was a shrewd calculator and knew how to manage his own animals, drunk or sober. The cornmeal stands in the yard beneath a shelter. It is like a common coffee mill. The hopper holding about 6 quarts, there was one privilege which Master Epps granted freely to every slave he had. They might grind their corn nightly in such small quantities as their daily wants required, or they might grind a whole week's allowance at one time on Sundays, just as they preferred. A very generous man, Master Epps was. I kept my corn in a small wooden box, the meal in a gourd. And by the way, the gourd is one of the most convenient and necessary utensils on a plantation. Besides supplying the place of all kinds of crockery in a slave cabin, it is used for carrying water to the fields. Another also contains the dinner. It dispenses with the necessity of pails, dippers, basins, and such tin and wooden superfluities altogether. When the corn is ground and the fire is made, the bacon is taken down from the nail on which it hangs, a slice cut off, and thrown upon the coals to broil. The majority of slaves have no knife, much less a fork. They cut their bacon with the axe at the woodpile. The cornmeal is mixed with a little water, placed in a fire, and baked. When it is done brown, the ashes are scraped off, and being placed upon a chip which answers for a table, the tenant of the slave hut is ready to sit down upon the ground to supper. By this time it is usually midnight. The same fear of punishment which would their approach the gin house possesses them again on lying down to get a snatch of rest. It is the fear of oversleeping in the morning. Such an offense would certainly be attended with not less than 20 lashes. With a prayer that he may be on his feet and wide awake at the first sound of the horn, he sinks to his slumbers nightly. The softest couches in the world are not to be found in the log mansion of the slave. The one whereon I reclined year after year was a plank 12 inches wide, 10 feet long. My pillow was a stick of wood. The bedding was a coarse blanket, and not a rag or shred beside. Moss might be used, were it not that it directly breeds a swarm of fleas. The cabin is constructed of logs, without floor or window. The latter is altogether unnecessary, the crevices between the logs admitting sufficient light. In stormy weather, the rain drives through them, rendering it comfortless and extremely disagreeable. The rude door hangs on great wooden hinges. At one end is constructed an awkward fireplace. An hour before daylight, the horn is blown. Then the slaves arouse, prepare their breakfast, fill a gourd with water, and another deposit their dinner of cold bacon and corn cake, and hurry to the field again. It is an offense invariably followed by a flogging to be found at the quarters after daybreak. Then the fear and labors of another day begin, and until its close there is no such thing as rest. He fears he will be caught lagging through the day. He fears the approach of the gin house with his basket load of cotton at night. He fears when he lies down that he will oversleep himself in the morning. Such is a true, faithful, unexaggerated picture and description of the slave's daily life during the time of cotton picking on the shores of Bayou Buff. In the month of January, generally the fourth and last picking is completed. Then commences the harvesting of corn. This is considered a secondary crop and receives far less attention than the cotton. It is planted, as already mentioned, in February. Corn is grown in that region for the purpose of fattening hogs and feeding slaves, very little, if any, being sent to the market. It is the white variety, the ear of great size, and the stalk growing to the height of 8 and often 10 feet. In August, the leaves are stripped off, dried in the sun, bound in small bundles, and stored away as provender for the mules and oxen. And after this, the slaves go through the field, turning down the ear for the purpose of keeping the rains from penetrating the grain. It is left in this condition until after cotton picking is over, whether earlier or later. Then the ears are separated from the stalks and deposited in a corn crib with the husks on. Otherwise, stripped of the husks, the weevil would destroy it. The stalks are left standing in the field. The Carolina or sweet potato is also grown in that region to some extent. They are not fed, however, to hogs or cattle, and are considered but a small importance. They are preserved by placing them upon the surface of the ground with a slight covering of earth or corn stalks. This is not a cellar on Bayou Buff. The ground is so low it would fill with water. Potatoes are worth from 2 or 3 bits or shillings a barrel. Corn, except when there is an unusual scarcity, can be purchased at the same rate. As soon as the cotton and the corn crops are secured, the stalks are pulled up, thrown into piles, and burned. The piles are started at the same time, throwing up the beds again, preparatory to another planting. The soil in the Rapides Parish and Avopolis and throughout the whole country so far as my observation extended is of exceeding richness and fertility. It is a kind of marl of a brown or reddish color. It does not require those invigorating composts necessary to more barren lands. And on the same field, the same crop is grown for many successive years. Plowing, planting, picking cotton, gathering the corn, and pulling and burning stalks occupies the whole of 4 seasons of the year. Drawing and cutting wood, pressing cotton, fattening, and killing hogs are but incidental labors. In the months of September or October, the hogs are run out of the swamp by dogs and confined to pens. On a cold morning, generally about New Year's Day, they are slaughtered. Each carcass is cut up into 6 parts and piled, one above the other in salt, upon large tables in the smokehouse. In this condition, it remains a fortnight, when it is hung up and a fire built and continued more than half the time during the remainder of the year. This thorough smoking is necessary to prevent the bacon from becoming infested with worms. In soil, warm, and climate, it is difficult to preserve it, and very many times myself and my companions have received our weekly allowance of 3 pounds and a half when it was full of these disgusting vermin. Although the swamps are overrun with cattle, they are never made the source of profit. To any considerable extent, the planter cuts his mark upon the ear or brands his initials upon the side and turns them into the swamps to roam, unrestricted, within their almost limitless confines. They are the Spanish breed, small and spiked horn. I have known of droves being taken from Bayou Buff, but it is a very rare occurrence. The value of the best cows is about $5 each. 2 quarts at one milking would be considered an unusual large quantity. They furnish little tallow, and that of a soft, inferior quality. Notwithstanding the great number of cows that throng the swamps, the planters are indebted to the North for their cheese and butter, which is purchased in New Orleans market. Salted beef is not an article of food either in the great house or in the cabin. Master Epps was accustomed to attending shooting matches for the purpose of obtaining what fresh beef he required. These sports occurred weekly at the neighboring village of Holmesville. Fat beeves are driven thither and shot at, a stipulated price being demanded for the privilege. The lucky marksman divides the flesh among his fellows, and in this manner the attendant planters are supplied. The great number of tame and untamed cattle which swarm the woods and swamps of Bayou Buff most probably suggested the appellation to the French, inasmuch as the term translated signifies the creek or river of the wild ox. Garden products such as cabbage, turnips, and the like are cultivated for the use of the master and his family. They have greens and vegetables at all times and seasons of the year. The grass withered and the flower fadeth before the desolating winds of autumn. In the chill northern latitudes, but perpetual verdure overspread the hot lowlands, and flowers bloom in the heart of winter in the region of the Bayou Buff. There are no meadows appropriated to the cultivation of the grasses. These leaves of the corn supply a sufficiency of food for the laboring cattle, while the rest provide for themselves all year round in the ever-growing pasture. There are many other peculiarities of climate, habit, and custom, and of manner of living and laboring at the South, but the foregoing, it is supposed, will give the reader an insight and general idea of life on a cotton plantation in Louisiana. The mode of cultivating cane and the process of sugar manufacturing will be mentioned in another place. All righty, so chapter 12, I'll do a recap on that. And Mr. Northup is sold to a different plantation owner, and now he gets to see firsthand field life, as well as explains the different fruit trees, the different vegetables, and extensively he talks about how cotton is planted and cultivated and harvested. And also he talks about something that is very often not spoke of, but the requirements for the workers. So the constant state of fear that you live in as an enslaved human, it's got to be traumatically stressful to never do enough and to always be on edge, because at any moment you're going to get lashes from the whip. But he explains extensively how the land is and what the land produces, and also how the diet of the family of the plantation owner. So all they eat is salted pork and a corn cake. So 3 pounds of pork and a peck of cornmeal. So I just want to let y'all know I appreciate very much y'all joining this live literature read of this wonderful book, 12 Years a Slave. Appreciate very much y'all attention and y'all supporting this chapter and this reading of such an astonishing history of such a great man. So it's with that we will conclude this session of our publication. So I'll snuff out the candles. Thank you very much. And this will conclude 12 Years a Slave, the autobiography of a great man, Mr. Solomon Northup. Thank you so much for joining.